I'm sure you guys have seen this cartoon before. And it's this idea that healthcare, doctors are mopping up the floor, right? We're giving you Lipitor to treat your high cholesterol. We're doing weight loss surgery on you to treat your obesity. But really what should be happening is we should be turning off the sink, right? And when we talk about plant-based diets and things like that for a global perspective, yes, that helps turn off the sink. But I got to deal with this. I got to deal with Marcus when he comes into my office. And I think everybody needs to take a minute and look at Marcus and think to yourself, what do you think about Marcus when you see him? What goes through your mind? Maybe in the deep, deep graces. What was that? Eating plenty of crap, right. And why is he doing it? Is it his fault? Is he sloppy? Is he low self-esteem? Is this a depression thing? Is he lazy? Is Marcus lazy? Yeah. And I'll tell you, in medicine, a lot of doctors see this, and they'll call me and they'll be like, oh, man, I got this fat guy for you. And that always, that kind of, that hurts me when they say that because I know these people better than they do. They don't give them a chance. And I'll tell you one thing. We go to these conferences and we get excited, right? And you leave here, and the one thing you think is, I know how to do it. If Marcus just did it my way. How many health coaches do we have? We got some health coaches out there. How many doctors out there? Medical professionals, dietitians. I mean, you leave this conference, you get charged up, right? I saw Brenda Davis's talk. This is how you got to do it. And if he doesn't do it that way, then he's not going to work. My way is the best way. And I know that I get the same way. Like I go to a conference like this, I get really excited. And, I go out to dinner with my friends and they're, please don't be preachy tonight. And I'm like, I promise I won't be preachy. But 2 kombuchas later, and I'm like, plant-based diet is the answer to... This is how bad science can get out there in order to fool the public. I mean, here, ignore this outside stuff here. Here, this guy published, he compared a study that showed people that weren't in ketosis, how much fat they burned, versus people that were in ketosis, how much fat they burned. Oh my gosh, you burn more fat exercising if you're ketosis, so I should do ketosis. But wait a second, now let's look at the outside. This study, 300 people, this study, 5. This study, 15 to 30 minutes of exercise. This study, 2.5 hours. Differences all the way down. These are 2 completely different groups. That's how they try to confuse you. You get people like this out there that'll actually tell you plants are dangerous to your health. Plants are dangerous to your health? How can anybody possibly say that? And he wrote a book about it. And it's got no science in it. It's not referenced like my book. But people believe it. And this whole idea of carbohydrates, this idea that carbohydrates make you fat just absolutely kills me. Carbohydrates, there's been many studies. This was a really good study that it was a meta-analysis, looked over many different studies. There is no correlation between carb intake and obesity. There is none. Carbs do not make you fat. If they made you fat, the Okinawans would be fat. They eat mainly rice and sweet potatoes. That's the vast majority of their diet. They eat 85% of their diet from carbohydrate. And yet, if you look at a traditional Okinawan, they lose weight as they get older, unlike Americans where we keep gaining weight. And in fact, you might not know this, but your body can't really turn a carb to fat. It's called de novo lipogenesis. For you to take a carbohydrate and turn it to fat, you have to have saturated all your glycogen stores and then eaten so many calories that your body will then turn it to fat, and that is a very rare situation. Your body doesn't turn carbs to fat. But then, it doesn't matter, all these different diets that are out there, none of them really work. I mean, it's called the A to Z trial, and they looked at all the different diets, and over a year, what happened, they all lost about the same amount of weight, and it wasn't that much weight. Talking about 3 to 4 kilograms. Atkins did the best, but the Ornish diet, was it really on an Ornish diet? Again, you got to read between the lines. They were eating about 20 grams of fiber a day. That should be an Ornish breakfast, 20 grams of fiber. And they were eating higher protein than they ate before, and they were eating 30% fat. So it wasn't a real Ornish diet. In fact, no one really stuck to the diet anyway, and it didn't work. When you look at ketosis, if you take ketosis patients and you put them in a ward and you study them, when you go into ketosis, what happens is your body gets rid of all of its carbohydrates stored as glycogen. Well, your body stores glycogen with water. So a lot of the weight loss is actually water weight. And in fact, your ability to burn fat actually slows down in ketosis. not speeds up. But all of these diets, they're all kind of, they've got bad design. They don't feed the people the right stuff. And Dr. Willett showed this study, but to elaborate a bit, this was a study by Dr. Gardner where he said, I'm going to give people a very healthy low-fat diet, and I'm going to give them a very healthy low-carb diet. And let's see what the difference is. And guess what? There is no difference. Both groups eating a healthy low-carb or a healthy low-fat lost roughly 4 kilograms of weight over a course of a year. That's not that much. 10 pounds? Now, if you look at the studies, there were some people that did really well in the low carb, some people that did really well in the low fat, some people that did badly. My interest is if I took this person and put them over here, would they do well, or are these people just destined to fail no matter what diet they're doing? But that's a whole nother study. The bottom line is diets just don't seem to work very well. Now, do you know what the best studied diet ever, or the study that had the most weight loss ever, was the Broad study. And this was a whole food, plant-based diet. They gave the people an option of eating as much of these foods as you could possibly want, no calorie restriction whatsoever. You could eat all this you want, eat this limited, don't eat any of this. And people lost the most weight that has ever been recorded in a diet weight loss study in 1 year. So they lost about 12 pounds. That's good. 12 pounds is good. It's not going to cure our obesity problem, but this is treating obesity, right? There's a difference between treating and preventing, but that's all they lost. They lost about 12 grams. That's great. That's a great finding. It just isn't a lot. I like the idea of eating as much as you want of these diets. People have tried this for years, and not being worried about carbs, right? As many of these carbs as you want. You could eat as much as you want. The simple act of saying I'm hungry is not so simple. All right? It's not that simple. We always think, right, what happens? You go on a diet and you do well in the beginning, right? Someone offers you a cake and you say, I don't want that cake, I'm on a diet. But 3 weeks later, someone offers you a cake and you're like, oh my God, that looks so good. Is that Betty Crocker? And next thing you know, you're eating cake. And then what do you say? Because I talk to patients all the time, right? What happened? Well, I failed the diet. I failed the diet. Did they fail the diet? They think of it as I didn't have the willpower to do the diet. Okay, willpower is a thought process, right? I am thinking I'm going to will my way through this. That comes from this part of the brain, all right? Hunger is determined by this part of the brain, the hypothalamus and the brainstem, the ancient brain, the brain that formed a gazillion years ago, right? The brain that formed in times of feast or famine. All right? We have this big, huge, stretchable stomach. When I cut that stomach out, if we stain it for elastic, it's got elastic fibers in it. It's made to stretch. All right? Now, whether you believe in evolution or intelligent design, that stomach wasn't designed for us to get our money's worth at a buffet. All right? It was designed so that we can eat when food wasn't around, because food usually wasn't around. All right? Winter was coming. Now, winter is here, and we could go to McDonald's at 2 in the morning. But those kind of factors work against us now. So what may have been protective for Marcus a gazillion years ago is no longer protective for Marcus. But his body still thinks, his body's still designed for that feast or famine. And it's a very complex thing. Hunger is extremely complex. There are all kinds of variables that fit into this very primitive part of the brain. The part of the brain, by the way, that determines how much you breathe, how fast your heart rate is. You could hold your breath for a while, but then you're going to breathe. You could try to change your heart rate, but it's going to keep going. You could try not to eat, but you're going to fail eventually. And it's because this is a very primitive, protective part of the brain. And there's feeding into it. Ghrelin hormone, a hormone that comes from the stomach that we'll talk about. PYY from the intestines. The vagus nerve. Fat secretes something called leptin we're going to talk about. And people have different responses to this, and a lot of it is genetically encoded. There's definitely genes that predispose us towards being overweight. If you look at twin studies where they took twins, oh, I've got 57 minutes left, right? Okay, right? Oh, good. I thought I had 3 minutes left. I was like, oh my God. I've been going on too long. Okay, when you look at twin studies, they took twins that were separated at birth, grew up in different environments, and then they looked at them. If you look at monozygotic twins, identical twins, it doesn't make a difference what their environment was. right? Even in a shared environment, it didn't make a difference. But look at this. In a shared environment, dizygotic twins, non-identical twins, look at the differences. In fact, in twin studies, weight is the most inherited gene we have on par with height, more than hair color and eye color and things like that. And there's many genes that we're looking at now. A lot of it we don't know yet, but we know that there's big differences between people. We've done these functional MRI studies. If you look at a normal person's brain, I don't like to say normal, a normal weight person's brain, the red indicates dopamine receptors. If you got a lot of dopamine receptors and you eat food and it stimulates dopamine, you get a like, I just ate. I'm fine. I'm good, right? I had my salad. I'm good. Now, I want you to look at a brain of an obese person. Where are the dopamine receptors? They don't have it. And what happens then? They're desperate for something to stimulate that brain to say, I'm satisfied. They don't get that satisfaction. And it looks a lot like the brain of a cocaine addict or of an alcoholic. And even worse yet, whether it's genes, it also may be what's called epigenetics. Have you guys heard of epigenetics? What mom ate while baby is in the tummy could have a big difference too. We know that certain foods that mom eats can affect the genes and the way the genes are activated in the baby. And get this. This blows my mind. They know this about smoking and they're thinking it about obesity too. That what mom eats or smokes affects the baby, but if it's a female baby, it also affects the female baby's eggs. So that when that female baby grows up and has a baby, that baby is affected by what its grandmother did when she was pregnant, which is crazy. So before we go blaming patients, maybe we need to blame their grandparents. It goes back. It's very complicated. And a lot of it goes to different kind of coding. So what are these genes coding for? Well, they're coding for these different hormones. Some people produce more ghrelin, which makes you hungry. Ghrelin's an interesting hormone made by the stomach. If you start fasting, your ghrelin level continually goes up. If you go on a diet, the ghrelin level continues to go up and you become very hungry. Now, interestingly, if I do a weight loss surgery where I cut out part of the stomach, that ghrelin level drops dramatically. So when people have had weight loss surgery, it's not that they're forced not to eat, they just don't feel like eating because they have a lot lower ghrelin level. Leptin is another very interesting hormone. Our fat cells secrete a hormone called leptin. And that leptin, again, goes to that primitive part of the brain. Leptin is supposed to tell the brain, okay, we got fat on store, we're good. All right, we're good. We could handle a winter of fasting. If you start losing leptin, because you're losing fat, so you go on a diet, you start losing fat, less fat cells, less leptin. Less leptin, the brain says, oh my God, I don't have enough fat, I need to get the person eating again. There's another hormone called PYY. Again, it increases hunger. And so there's many different factors. In fact, your gut microbiome may be a big factor in how hungry you are, how much you eat, or even what your metabolism is. I don't know if you guys have you heard about transfusions? Do you know what that is? It's this idea of taking someone else's feces and ingesting it to change your microbiome. Now, yeah, this is happening. Wonderful world of science. Right now, the only indication for it is to treat a bacteria called C. diff, which happens in hospitals quite frequently now, is becoming antibiotic resistant. So there was a case where there was a thin woman who had C. diff, so she got a transfusion, and she got it from her daughter-in-law who was overweight, and 6 months later, she was overweight. So now with transfusions, you can't get it from someone who's overweight. But it's interesting because there may be a lot with the microbiome, and I'll get into a little bit later, on how it affects our weight. Interestingly, in some studies, now these are, albeit mainly in rat studies, but with a gastric bypass, there's a great increase in the diversity of microbiome afterwards. And they think that maybe this increase in microbiome may be part of the reason the surgery works so effectively. But back to this idea, like when you think of an overweight patient and you think, okay, they're overweight because it's their choice and it's their mind, I want to draw you to this study because there was a medication that came out called rimonabant. Now, rimonabant works on the endocannabinoid receptors, the CBD receptors in the brain. And it blocks them. I guess they saw that people smoking pot got the munchies. So what if we block the munchies? And so this drug was extremely effective. It takes away your will to eat. Now, it didn't get FDA approval because it also takes away your will to live. But it had some interesting studies because they put people on either a placebo, a sugar pill, or rimonabant at 5 milligrams, rimonabant at 20 milligrams. They don't know what they're getting, right? They're getting a pill. They didn't tell them anything about diet or exercise. Look at the differences between the 20 milligram, the 5 milligram, and the none. That's a pretty, they're not doing anything different. They're just getting a pill. Did they all of a sudden get willpower? Or is there some kind of chemical problem that they have, a disease that we are treating? Now, what's interesting is on this rimonabant group, they're doing great. We're going to slip them a placebo right here. Look what happens. All of a sudden, they're lazy again. There's something more to this. And that's why it's so hard to portion control. And it's so hard, I like this meme. 12 o'clock, I'm going to save this sandwich for later, 12:06. I'm going to finish that sandwich now. It's hard for us to do these things because our brain is working at a very fundamental level. Our body's working against us. But what do we do with the individual patient that is suffering from obesity? And sometimes surgeons are made fun of, but a chance to cut is sometimes a chance to cure. And you got to understand, we don't go into these surgeries lightly. We don't say, oh, you're overweight, let's go to the operating room right now. We put people through a whole pre-operative workup plan. We make them lose weight beforehand. We have them go on diets. And again, I put them on a plant-based diet. I talk to them the benefits of calories, the same things I'm telling you right now. And we found that it doesn't really matter if they lose weight beforehand that much, but afterwards it matters. They do really well once I start telling them about plant-based diet. There's several surgeries that we do just to touch on what we're doing when we do surgery. We no longer do the lap band. The lap band, we wrap the band around the top part of the stomach. This was almost like forced bulimia. People would eat, wouldn't go through. And you gotta understand, we can make that band tighter or looser, but if I make it loose enough to fit the broccoli I want them to eat, guess what's going through there? Cookies. You're going to fly through there. And actually, funny enough, the ghrelin hormone increases in these patients because we're not doing anything to the hormones, so they can't eat as much. Their ghrelin level goes up. Their PYY goes up. They're hungry. So they're eating ice cream because ice cream slides through. So this surgery just didn't do very well. Gastric bypass is the old tried and true. What we're doing in the bypass is we're cutting and separating this little piece of the stomach from that part of the stomach, and we're bringing up a piece of intestine and joining it up here. Now what happens with that, they can't eat as much because the stomach's smaller, but because we're bypassing food from the stomach, ghrelin level drops. By having food bypass and come over to this part of the intestine, it increases a hormone called GLP-1, which is a strong treater of diabetes. These people, their diabetes gets better regardless of their weight, whether they lose weight. The PYY still increases a little bit, but not as much. Sleeve gastrectomy, a little bit different. We're cutting out, we're basically, we look at this as a vestigial organ. This is from the days of where you had to eat a lot, so because there was going to be a fast, so we cut this part of the stomach out, leaving just a thin stomach. That part of the stomach secretes ghrelin, so ghrelin drops. GLP-1 goes up a little bit, and this is pretty effective. Duodenal switch this is a malabsorption procedure. It kind of takes food and puts it almost all the way at the colon before it gets digestive juices, so you just don't absorb as much. This is the most effective surgery for weight loss, but there's a lot of vitamin deficiencies, so it's not done as much. In general, in the right hands with the right people, this is a very safe surgery. There's very low risks of complications. People do pretty well. There is some weight regain over time, but it's not weight regain back to what they were before. And I would say that my experience is like this because instead of telling them to eat a high-protein diet like a lot of my colleagues do, I'm very big on obviously a whole food plant-based diet. So let's go back to my buddy, Marcus. After knowing all this, Marcus and I sat down and talked. And I said, Marcus, I could do this surgery on you, but it is just a tool, all right? Lifestyle's the important part. The tool is there to overcome the fact that your dad, your grandfather, your uncles were all obese. The tool is to combat the fact that you were in fat camp since you were 5 years old. The tool is to get there so that you're not hungry and have that constant feel like you can't get satisfied, which he told me he had. But you still got to do the right things. You still got to move. We got to get exercise. I need you eating plants. And he said, I promise you I will do that all, doctor. And in fact, if I do it, you got to promise me you will do a triathlon with me because I'm going to do a triathlon. Imagine a 500-pound guy telling you he's going to do a triathlon with you. Well, here we are a year later, finishing a triathlon together. This was an Olympic triathlon, which is it's a mile swim, 25-mile bike, and a 6-mile run. That wasn't enough for him, so he went on to do an Ironman. Yeah, and here he is. He's finishing an Ironman. He always carries a picture of what he used to look like with him to just remind himself. So, yeah. And here we are together afterwards. He's now a plant-based Ironman. So you really can't make these changes. And the thing is, this is not like an isolated one-off patient. I mean, I see these kind of huge changes. It's the joy in my life to see this every day. I get to do it every day. So it is an existential crisis going between this like very Western medicine versus this very more Eastern idea of food as medicine. And I have to battle with that daily, but I love what I do. I try as best I can, both with my patients and publicly when I give talks, to try to take all that information that's out there and distill it into a little bit of knowledge and wisdom, and to understand that really the important thing is plants. It is fruit and vegetables. When a patient comes in, this is a patient who was asking me why they were gaining weight and they're eating eggs and turkey and turkey and turkey. And I was like, you are what you eat. You turkey. So... and I don't tell people to go vegan. I try to tell them to shift the plate, to flip it, make the meat the side dish if you have to, but the emphasis needs to be on the plants and the fruits and the vegetables. My general recommendations are the things you've already heard here before. No grazing, try to eat the same time every day, eat over a 10-hour period, get 10,000 steps, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Journaling and goal setting, we do all these things with our patients. I definitely focus on a pyramid like Joel Fuhrman's. Eat as much of this as you want so you don't have to calorie restrict. You don't ever have to be desperate. I try to teach them to make easy meals that are cheap. Oatmeal and berries, big salads that don't just look like iceberg and ranch dressing but are colorful. Healthy snack foods. We talk a lot, everybody here is interested in organic and all that stuff, and I definitely think organic's better. But when I'm dealing with someone from Appalachia, I got to give them some canned foods. I got to give them frozen vegetables. I got to do whatever I can to get them so that they're eating something better than Bojangles fried chicken. And so those are the kind of things that I try to teach to my patients. So it's a kind of combination between Western and Eastern thought processes and ideas. Certainly I hope in the future this is what it's like. Doctor, I don't feel well. I'm not sure why. I want you to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day, exercise for at least 30 minutes, avoid processed food, eat plenty of organic fruits and vegetables, spend more time in nature, less indoors, stop worrying about things you can't control, ditch your TV, and see me in 3 weeks. Thank you, guys.